Hare Krishna, Namaste, Chapter 18, Sloka 66, Part 75. Sarva-dharmān parityajya, ekaṁ śaraṇaṁ vraja, ahaṁ sarva-pāpebhyo, mokṣayiṣyāmi śucaḥ. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. In the previous session, we learned that how, when one comes in contact with a devotee, a Vaishnava gets liberated, even if that Vaishnava is low by birth. Nambadwan was a Chandala by birth, whereas Brahma Rakshasa was higher by birth when we consider his previous life, who was a Brahmana by name Soma Sharma. In today's session, we will learn, irrespective of whatever one's position is, however great they may be, but if a person offends a Vaishnava, he falls down. This story is told by Bhishma Dev to Yudhishthira in Mahabharata. There was a great king by name Uparichara. He was very well respected and honored by many other kings. He was king of all kings. Not only respected by other kings, but he was greatly praised by devas and rishis. That is because of his great understanding in the scriptures, in the Dharma Shastra. Being a Kshatriya, not only he knows about his dharma, but he was very well versed with the intricacies of everything that's mentioned in the scripture. Even great rishis and devatas at times approach him for clarity, for advices. He was a very staunch follower of Lord Vishnu, and he did his worship without fail every single day. He had all good characters and behaviors. Because of these things, his penance and austerity, he earned a chariot which could fly, and this chariot never touches the ground. That was the elevated, exalted position of Uparichara. One time there was a debate between the sages and the devatas. They were going to perform a yaga. The question arises during that time is whether to sacrifice a real pasu, a real animal, a goat, or a pishtapasu, a goat which is modeled using a rice dough. Devatas were saying that one must use real pasu, real animal, in the fire sacrifice, whereas the rishis were saying it must be pishtapasu, a pasu which is made of rice dough. It cannot be a real animal. As the debate was continuing, at the same time, King Uparichara was flying on the sky in his chariot along with his soldiers, along with his servants, and with a lot of wealth. Noticed by the sages, they thought that the best way to resolve this is by seeking advice from Uparichara. Therefore, they requested Uparichara to resolve the issue. Based on their request, Uparichara came to the spot and the sages asked to resolve the problem. Hearing this, Uparichara asked, "First please explain each of your philosophy. What is your argument? Based on that, I'll give my word." The rishis said, "We are in the process of doing a yagya, And then the question arises whether to use a pishta pasu or pratyaksha pasu, a goat which is made of a dough or a goat which is real, alive. And the rishis said, we say that one must use pishta pasu. That is our matam. And then the devata says they have to use pratyaksha pasu, and that is their matam. Now, will you please resolve this issue? What is the right thing to do? Are we supposed to use a modeled animal, a goat, or a real goat in the sacrifice? Hearing both sides of argument, Uparicharavasu then spoke, giving his final verdict, saying that the sacrifice must use a real white goat. The king actually had a soft corner for the devatas. He was inclined towards devatas. Understanding that king is biased in his response, that he is favoring the devatas, not speaking the truth, the rishis who were powerful through their austerity and penance, who were looking like sun descended into this world, became very, very angry. And they said, what you said is not right. You did not tell the truth, and it is against the scriptures. Therefore, if what you said is not right, you will fall down into Patala Loka, and from now onwards you will not be able to fly on the sky using your chariot. It will become useless for you. In other hand, if we have lied, then let us fall down into Patala Loka. Within no matter of time, the king fell off from his flying chariot upside down deep into Patala Loka, because he offended the sages who were Vaishnavas. In the story, we can see how much knowledgeable the king was, that even devatas, even rishis went to him to clear their doubts in the Shastras. Therefore, what we learn from the story is that it is not only when someone who's less in knowledge, less in birth, less in their practices, offends a person who is higher in knowledge, higher in birth, higher in practices, gets punished. Even those who are in a higher position, who are very knowledgeable, high in their birth, strict in their practices, when they offend someone who is less in knowledge, lower in birth, and less in practices, gets serious reaction. There is no any such rule that only when juniors offend senior get reaction. Even if the senior offends a junior, even they get reaction. When we say seniors and juniors, it is based on one's knowledge, number of years they have been practicing, based on their birth, and whatever they practice. It doesn't matter how many years we have been practicing, how strong we have been practicing, how much knowledge that we have. But once we offend a Vaishnava, all those things is going to be of no use. Our knowledge, our birth, our practices, none of these things can save us. And we can learn this point from this story. Though by birth rishis were higher, they were brahmanas, and the king Uparicharavasu was a Kshatriya. When we compare between the birth and knowledge, the knowledge plays higher position than the birth. In that sense, King Uparicharavasu was higher in position because of his knowledge compared to the Brahmanas. Some additional notes here. Based on this story, we learn that the king fell down because he gave a wrong verdict, saying that one must use a real animal in the sacrifice. By saying this, he offended the Vaishnavas, the sages, and he lost his position and fell down to Patala Loka. But in the scriptures, we can get references clearly states that pratyaksha pasu can be used. If we consider those statements from the scriptures, then what is wrong in what Uparichara Vasu said? It is true that both things are supported in the scriptures. One can use Pishta Pasu or one can use Pratyaksha Pasu. But it depends on the person who's performing the sacrifice. If a person is ahimsavadi, a person who is a non-violent person, then he uses Pishtapasu. If a person is himsavadi, who is a violent person, then he will use Pratyaksha Pasu. We know from the story, the king was approached and asked question by the rishis. Therefore, the solution must be provided is Pishtapasu, not Pratyaksha Pasu. If we read the Puranas and Itihasas, we can find references where even in Krita Yuga, some Brahmanas ate mamsa, ate meat. The famous story is where Agastya ate the meat cooked by a demon. But such things are not allowed in Kali Yuga. No Brahmanas must eat mamsa. So one may come to a decision that in Krita Yuga one can eat, whereas in Kali Yuga one must not eat. If that is the case, if someone from Krita Yuga still lives in Kali Yuga, can they eat meat? The point here is, irrespective of which yuga, what needs to be considered is who is performing the sacrifice. If a devotee is performing a sacrifice, then it must be Pishtapasu, a pashu made of rice dough. If a person is not Paramaikanti, a staunch devotee, then that person uses Pratyaksha Pasu. Uparichara Vasu, knowing that these are great rishis, wonderful Vaishnavas, and they are the one who approached asking for solution, the king must have said the right thing, which is to use a Pishtapasu, not Pratyaksha Pasu. But since he was biased, wanted to favor the Devas, he did not tell the truth. By this, he has offended the rishis and fell down from his position. This is the fourth story that we have been seeing in this series. The first one was Garudas. The second one was Parityajya. The third one was Nambadavan. And the fourth one that we saw today was King Uparichara Vasu. A doubt may arise, what is the necessity of today's story? Because didn't we already see that a greater person offending a lower one in the story of Garuda offending Sandali? Didn't we see Parityajya, who was Brahmana by birth, offended the non-Brahmanas? Then why do we have to see another story on same lesson? Let's quickly go over these stories that we saw, and then we will see how this story that we saw today is different, conveys a different message than the other stories. In the story of Garuda, he was a great devotee. He was direct servant of the Lord. By birth, he was Devata. Garuda doesn't need introduction. Everyone knows Garuda. But Sandali was a strī, was a woman, very simple, infamous devotee. But Garuda had that ahaṁkara of his birth, of being the direct servant of the Lord. Therefore, he offended Sandili, considering her birth, considering her place. As a reaction, he lost his wings. Parityajya, disciple of Kurathārvān, was a Brahmana by birth, but he was constantly offending the Bhagavatas, who are not Brahmanas. In the previous story, it was a strī, it was a woman that Garuda offended. Over here, it was those who are not Brahmanas by birth were offended by a Brahmana, Parityajya. Therefore, that ahaṁkaram of being born as a Brahmana was present within Parityajya. Therefore, he was offending other Vaishnavas who are not Brahmanas by birth. And in the third story, Nambāduvan and Brahma Rakshasa, we learned that even if a person is a Brahmana by birth, by the association of a great Vaishnava like Nambāduvan, who was born in a Chandala family, can liberate the Brahmana. But from all these three stories, the truth is that the position of a Vaishnava is not based on their birth. It is based on their bhakti, their knowledge. If we consider that aspect, Nambāduvan, though was born as a Chandala, whereas a Brahma Rakshasa, who was Brahmana in his previous life, still it is Nambāduvan considered to be greater because of his jnana and bhakti. Likewise, in the story of Parityajya, though he was a Brahmana, the others were not. That ahaṁkara of being born as a Brahmana became an obstacle for him. Therefore, he offended other Vaishnavas who are not Brahmanas by birth. That means his Brahmana jati that he got by birth itself became an obstacle. Therefore, we can say he was lower than the other Vaishnavas. In case of Garuda's story, it is very obvious, not by birth alone he was great, but also by his service to the Lord directly he is great. But then he underestimated a Vaishnava based on the body, that Sandili was a woman. In that sense, Garuda became lower, whereas Sandili became higher in position. Now coming to Uparicharavasu's story, what is different from what we have seen so far in this story? Because even the king is considered higher due to his knowledge compared to the rishis. This higher and lower position we have already seen in other stories as well. So what makes this story different from other stories? All the other stories that we saw as one similar ending, whereas this story has a different ending. Garuda offended Sandili and sought for forgiveness, and his wings came back and he resumed his service to the Lord. Parityajya offended Vaishnavas. By the mercy of his Guru, he was saved, and also he attained moksha in that life. Brahma Rakshasa, who got the association of Nambāduvan, also got moksha in his next life. So we can see all these three stories ends with Shubham, happy ending. If all the stories ends like this, then there won't be any fear in us, and we will happily continuing offending devotees, thinking at the end anyway I will attain moksha. For that reason, this fourth story is being told. It is not the case always. Why? In case of King Uparichara, his ending was not Shubham. It was Ashubham. He did not attain moksha. He lost his position and fell down into Patala Loka. To illustrate this point, this story has been told. There are a lot more stories that we can pick from itihasas and puranas, how one must be very careful not to offend any Vaishnavas based on any criteria. If we are very serious in our life to attain Krishna in this very lifetime, then we must be very careful not to commit offense to any Vaishnavas. A Vaishnava may be a senior Vaishnava or a junior Vaishnava. They may have a complete knowledge of Krishna consciousness or they may not. They may practice everything or they may not. We have nothing to judge others based on their birth, their body, whether they are male, female, animal, bird, asura, rakshasa, or based on whether he is a child, a youth, or an old man. We cannot judge based on their ashram, respects only to sannyasi, not to others, or judging based on one's bodily feature, treating those Vaishnavas who are physically challenged, judging and treating Vaishnavas based on their ability, offending devotees based on their friends and relatives, giving special attention and importance only to those who are directly connected to the Guru Parampara or direct disciples of the Acharyas, treating Vaishnavas based on their profession, treating Vaishnavas based on the service that they do to the temple, offending someone based on their knowledge, their anushtanam, their conduct, blaming devotees for no mistake of theirs, and judging devotees based on where they live. So let's be careful in all aspects not to offend any devotees. Now the question is, what if I have already offended? Is there a solution? Is there a different approach if I offended a devotee by mind, by word, or by action? Let's see the answer for these questions in our next session. Thank you. Hare Krishna.